a really exceptional, phenomenal public servant, human being, and real mensch, John Bolton.
Thank you so much. That's got to be one of the kindest introductions I've ever had, and I've learned a joke now about the Pope that I will never forget. But you have to be careful where you tell it. It's a real honor to be with all of you this evening, and to meet the Minister of Justice from Israel, and to celebrate these critical events. Beginning with the Six-Day War and the liberation of Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria. You know, we're in the 100th anniversary now of World War I. And so much of the century that we've just seen pass, and I worry that so much of what we're about to see ahead really began during those days. The Balfour Declaration, obviously. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire and the creation of the Middle East as we have seen it over the past decades. The creation of the League of Nations, Woodrow Wilson's idea that was going to bring peace to the world and make the world safe for democracy, as he thought World War I was going to do. And with the system of mandates and the granting of the British mandate over Palestine, as it was called. You know, we are now at a place where, over the course of that century, the order that was established then, or thought to be established, is collapsing. And the consequences for Israel, for the United States, really worldwide, are very much, should be very much at the forefront of our concerns, because these dangers are growing day by day. The Balfour Declaration, really one of the most important documents that helped in the American political system, outside of the Jewish community, in understanding the nature of what the Zionist movement saw, really came to fruition after World War II because of courageous decisions, obviously what was going on in what is today Israel by the Zionists there who were fighting for the creation of the State of Israel, but the determination not just of Britain, which really had already begun to lose its moorings, but by the Truman administration in the United States. And it's no accident that the first state to recognize Israel was the United States. And it was the mark of an alliance that today, personalities notwithstanding, is as strong as it's ever been. And I would say in the United States, stronger than it's ever been, because now, after so many years of Israel being a special concern of the Jewish community in the United States, support for the State of Israel, as David said earlier, is stronger among the American population probably than any other alliance that the United States has. It's a remarkable fact, but support for Israel is broad and deep in this country. And that is a political reality no one should forget. When the Six-Day War was over and Jerusalem was once again united and the capital of a united Israel, many people thought that this would be a temporary phenomenon. And after the '73 war, people thought it would be a temporary phenomenon. We've been arguing for some 40 years about how to return everything that Israel won in 2 successful wars. It's really quite something when you think about it, that the only path to peace that Israel's enemies can see is to act as if 2 wars of aggression really never took place. And it's Israel that's been put on the defensive in the political arena in ways that it never really was on the defensive for very long in the military arena. And that's why the broader circumstances that Israel faces are so important for the United States, because once again, Israel is under attack, and in some respects, an attack that's more profound than the military threats that Israel has successfully overcome in the past. And really, you can see this on two fronts. Not just an effort to redivide Jerusalem, but what we see around the world, but particularly sad to say in Europe and the United States, is an effort to delegitimize the state of Israel itself. Not simply to question this Israeli policy or that Israeli policy, but to delegitimize the state. This is nothing new. Obviously, the Zionism is racism resolution itself was an effort to delegitimize Israel, to equate Zionism with the apartheid system of South Africa. This was the beginning of saying the government, therefore, was illegitimate. And I have to say, when in 1991, we were able to get the UN General Assembly to repeal the Zionism as racism resolution, I thought that we had made a significant step in ending this effort to question the legitimacy of Israel's very existence. Now, I've been called a lot of things in a long career in government and politics. Naive is not usually one of the things that I'm criticized for, but I have to say it became very clear very soon that repealing ZR didn't change anything fundamentally in the attitudes of Israel's opponents. They never gave up believing that Zionism was racism. And we see this effort reappear in the Durban Conference going back 15 years now, and I think fundamentally in the boycott, divestiture, and sanctions movement. This doesn't have anything to do with the quote-unquote occupied territories. It doesn't have anything to do with the Turkish flotilla. It doesn't have anything to do with whether there's going to be a two-state solution, which is a solution doomed to failure if it were ever implemented. BDS really is part of the argument against Israel itself. And unless we understand it in that sense, we're simply going to be fighting the battle with our hands tied behind our backs. And indeed, so much of the criticism that Israel faces is a veiled criticism of the United States. There's a lot to that metaphor about Israel being the canary in the mine shaft. And we heard earlier from David about the disproportionate force argument. You know, disproportionate force is something, I used to hear that at the United Nations all the time. Israel would be shelled from Lebanon by Hezbollah. They'd respond. Whatever it was Israel did in response, it was always disproportionate force. And I finally said that, you know, when you're confronted with adversaries, whether they're nation states or terrorists that are determined to destroy you, it is not disproportionate force to defend yourself up to and including defeating your enemy conclusively. So when the United States was attacked at Pearl Harbor on December the 7th, 1941, what would a proportional response have been? Sinking an equivalent number of Japanese battleships and destroyers? Were we supposed to stop after that? Of course not. When you're faced with an existential threat, you're entitled to defeat the threat so that your innocent civilians are safe. And it goes beyond that as well. Disproportionate force has been central to American military thinking for decades. To bring to bear overwhelming power to defeat an enemy in the most rapid fashion. Why? To save American lives. The sooner you finish a war, the more of your own people you don't have to sacrifice. And by the way, it's almost always true for the enemy as well. So when Israel responds, it's not doing anything that the United States wouldn't or shouldn't do in its place. And this is typical. It's one aspect of what I'm sure you've all heard is the concept of lawfare, of using so-called doctrines of international law against the West as a whole, really, not just Israel and the United States, but the West more broadly. All of these efforts to delegitimize Israel, which is a part of the West, and that's a fundamental point to understand, these have to be resisted in so many ways, and the list is long. But just to take one, I was speaking with the minister about, before we got started, the International Criminal Court, which enemies of Israel have their sights on using the ICC to haul ministers and officials of the government of Israel up before it for alleged war crimes or crimes against humanity. You know, I wrote in my memoir, my happiest day in all of my public service was the day that I unsigned President Clinton's signature on the Statute of Rome that created the International Criminal Court. This isn't a court. This is a device that's intended to intimidate the United States and Israel and its allies. And the next front in the lawfare battle that Israel is going to face, I think, almost certainly is going to be before the ICC. So this struggle for Israel's legitimacy and therefore its existence, sad to say, 100 years after the Balfour Declaration, and 3,000 years after Israel really came into existence, is still in the balance. There's not going to be an easy victory here. There's certainly no reason for complacency. And even beyond that, the entire Middle East, as we see it today, is descending into chaos. Israel's stability, its security in the region is more threatened now than at any time since 1948. Not from the specifics of Arab armies that are on its borders, but from the fact that terrorism is spreading all across North Africa, from the Atlantic Ocean really through the Middle East all the way to Pakistan. You see the post-World War I solution the states created at the end of World War I from the breakup of the Ottoman Empire themselves are now collapsing. Hopefully ISIS will be defeated at some point, particularly if we can get a new president. But I believe that Iraq and Syria have ceased to exist as functioning states. They're not going to come back together. Yemen has collapsed. Libya is in a state of chaos. Egypt no longer controls the Sinai Peninsula. You can see state structures disappearing, and the havens that are created for terrorists throughout the region are simply going to threaten Israel and the United States and the West as a whole even more gravely. And it goes beyond that as well. In Turkey today, we have a government in power that I think under President Erdogan is determined to recreate a caliphate reminiscent of the Ottoman Empire. Now, he may not succeed to that extent, but he is in the process of eliminating the secular foundations of the Turkish constitution to create an Islamicist society. He's moving Turkey away from the West, undermining a key pillar of the NATO alliance. And he's begun to undermine the rule of law itself. You know, when Erdogan was mayor of Istanbul 20 years ago now, he said, democracy is like a streetcar. You ride it to the stop you want, and then you get off. And that's what he's doing in Turkey today. And as if all of this were not a problem, sufficient problem, we have Iran making steady progress toward its 35-year-long objective of deliverable nuclear weapons. Ever since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, it's been clear that's what they sought. And the Vienna nuclear deal that was agreed in the summer of 2015 simply legitimizes this state sponsor of terrorism. the central banker of international terrorism, well before we unfroze $150 billion of assets or traded cash for hostages. Yet another aspect of the deal, every week that goes by, more concessions that the United States made in order to get this deal become clearer and clearer. So the world is, in many respects, well beyond the Middle East, looking at Russian pressure in Eastern and Central Europe, its new advances into the Middle East, looking at China's development of an aggressive, near belligerent policy in the East and South China Seas and its increases in its military capabilities, while the American military capability has shrunk over the past 8 years in a gravely threatening way, where we have withdrawn our attention from the world. The most serious manifestation is certainly in the Middle East, but it's true everywhere. It's why this election is so important, why every American citizen has to think about the security of the country. We've obviously got enormous economic issues at stake, but you know, if the country itself is not safe, everything else is secondary. And it's why it should be on your mind. It's always on the minds of the people of Israel, as everybody in this room knows, because of the circumstances that Israel faces. But I tell you, it should be on the mind of everybody in the United States too, because that's what there is at stake. So I think as we think about the consequences of the Six-Day War, we think about the consequences of the reunification of Jerusalem, we think about what the state of Israel has tried to do to provide peace and security for its people, the same policy that the United States has tried to pursue of peace through strength. We're not looking for military conflict. We've had enough military conflicts. But it's a strong military that dissuades our adversaries from even thinking about it. It's not American or Israeli strength that's provocative, it's weakness that's provocative. So the strength that we demonstrate makes our circumstances more peaceful and more secure, and it makes the world more peaceful and more secure. Thank you very much.